Hi everyone, I'll try to make this a quick video on using your core skills to write the research proposal, which is the major assignment for this unit. So if you have not yet read that assignment, go ahead and stop here, read the assignment sheet in the digital course pack, and then come on back to hear about how to use the skills that you will gain throughout the readings and tasks for the unit and integrate them into the research paper proposal. So here's the assignment overview and goals with some key items from the assignment sheet. And this proposal is really foundational for the rest of the course. It's going to help you connect literature to our real life community challenges and also prepare you for future assignments like the group project and the service learning project. So each section has a specific purpose, and hopefully it will help bring your writing skills together. So overall, you're going to write a 1,000-word research proposal that links a theme from Parable of the Sower to a local community need. And the proposal is going to include several sections. So if I were you, I would think about the writing process, sort of focusing on it chunk by chunk. And then if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by the entire assignment, if you look at it piece by piece, I think it will feel much more manageable. So you will include an introduction that presents the theme that you selected from the novel and its relevance to our community. You'll supply a discussion that analyzes the theme with textual research and support. You will give a research question that's focused, it's clear, it's arguable, it's compelling for your reader, it's not too simple. You will propose a group project that outlines a practical plan connected to the theme. And of course, you'll also have a conclusion that sort of wraps up everything, reflects on your learning and on the impact on the community. At the end of the proposal, you'll include what we call an annotated bibliography. That basically just means a works cited page, but instead of just having the entries for your sources, each source will have sort of a little paragraph connected with it that discusses the source. So on the annotated bibliography, you're going to have a minimum of 4 credible sources, and that should include 1 local source. So overall, you're going to use your core skills to develop a clear and well-supported argument, and also, of course, use that proper MLA formatting. So your research question is going to drive a lot of the proposal. So you want to avoid overly vague or broad questions like what is resilience, right? That's not clear, not specific. It's a little too ambiguous. So we want to focus on how the theme connects to a specific community issue to help clarify and guide your research and writing. So as you've read about and as you see on the screen before you, a good research question should be clear and easy to understand. It needs to be focused enough to allow deep exploration. It should be concise without unnecessary words, and it definitely needs to be complex. So not just a yes or a no, but something that's open-ended and arguable that allows for analysis and debate. So the example I provided, I think, in the digital course pack asks how Butler's portrayal of resilience in the parable of the sower can inform local community strategies to address food insecurity. So you might start with a really broad theme like resilience and then sort of refine it and continue to explore it until you come to a focused research question. And again, you want it to invite analysis, you want it to invite research, you want it to invite argument. So if you're having trouble developing a research question, you can definitely get in touch with me. You can use the IVCC Writing Center and its resources, or you can review the readings for the unit. Now, a key piece of the research proposal and of sort of everything for the whole semester, of course, is editing and integrating evidence. So if this is something you're not comfortable with, I would definitely recommend a writing center session or an office hours visit, because integrating your evidence is so key to strengthening your argument, and to making sure that it's really well developed. So you want to make sure that you properly introduce evidence in your own words to avoid those floating quotes. Of course, you want to cite all that evidence in MLA style, and it's very likely that you'll have to do some looking up when you run into those complicated cases. So, like, how do I handle a quote within a quote, right? How do I handle a really long quote, which is otherwise known as a block quote? If you're not familiar with that information already, you might need to refer back to the course readings, to the Little Seagull Handbook, to get some assistance with that. As I think I've said in the past, you want to avoid using evidence at the start and at the end of your paragraphs because you want your own ideas to be the most prominent. So instead, we want to use that evidence to support and develop your ideas. And finally, as it says in front of you, of course, you want to avoid using opinions as evidence. So stay away from I think, I feel, as evidence and rely on that research, rely on the novel to supply some highly credible evidence to help support what it is that you're saying. Speaking of avoiding opinions, one great way to do that is to use a formal tone. And this is the type of writing that is often used in academic writing. It's sort of the most common. And I gave you a web page to read about it, but let me just review some of the key points with you here. So you want to avoid or at least use sparingly the first person and the second person pronouns. When you're saying too much I, me, my, I think, I believe, I feel, again, you're relying too much on your feelings and opinions over actual evidence. And the second person sort of calls out the reader in a way that's inappropriate. So we want to, refer to that more formal and sort of say in the third person whenever possible. Here and there, it's okay, but it can very quickly sort of turn into too much. So just be careful with it. When you're talking about your sources, for example, Octavia Butler, you're going to use their full name only the first time you mention them and then their last name thereafter. So maybe I mention Octavia Butler's name in the introduction, and then after that, I'm going to only refer to her as Butler. And you're going to do that for all of the named sources that you use. Another guideline for formal voice is to avoid using contractions and to abbreviate words sparingly and appropriately. And we also want to avoid like casual language. So that would be things like colloquialisms, slang expression, non-standard diction. You don't always have to use like the fanciest word that you can find, but you definitely want to stay away from, for example, one I see slipping into student writing a lot is gonna, Gonna, instead of going to. So just watch out for those, little things that can slip in there. And then finally, be thoughtful about using curse words and sensitive language. So like there's definitely some language in Parable of the Sower. You might choose to use it in a direct quote, but just be thoughtful about doing that. Don't just, sort of throw it in there for no reason or for shock value. When it comes to doing research, this is one of the most important pieces of this course. So it's very important that you, as it says on the bottom bullet point here, we want to make sure that we're relying on quality sources, not just pulling information from like the Google search results. That's not going to give you good stuff. So you want to rely on those library resources for research. That might include using the SOAR search page on the home page. It might also include using the A to Z databases, which we have here at the college. And these are great places to find those highly reliable sources instead of relying on Google. So you can see the library presentation for more info. Ms. Stevenson is going to give you a lot of great information on that. But we want to critically evaluate all of these sources and not just take, any random blog or random, resource that pops up. So you should consider using that inquiry-based approach that you've read about with open-ended questions instead of starting with an answer and then only seeking to confirm it. Again, you're going to want to find scholarly and highly credible sources that relate to your theme and to the community need, and one local source such as a newspaper. So I could imagine students finding, articles about Parable of the Sower or about Octavia Butler. I could imagine students finding research about typical community needs like food insecurity among college students. I could imagine students finding articles in the Ivy Leader or in the Times or on WLPO's webpage about local issues, and then you're going to connect them all together in the proposal. So again, it's so important to evaluate each source, as it says in the second bullet point here. So what are their credentials? What is their expertise? Where was it published? Who reviewed it before it was published? How old is it? When was it published? Is there any bias or limitations of this research? All those things we want to consider and look at before we think about putting them in our essay. That's going to be really important. And it's a great idea to keep detailed notes with full citations. That can just really make your research process easier when you have to like sort of hunt down things. So I provided a link in the syllabus to watch these tutorials about using Noodle Tools note cards. They're super quick. They're like a minute each. And I think that those electronic note cards can be a great way to help keep track of your research. And it definitely also helps you avoid plagiarism, which is something that's going to be so important throughout this course. So effective research is definitely a key piece of the project. So once we have all this research, how do we actually synthesize them in our proposal? Because of course we don't just want to like summarize all of our sources separately. Instead, we want to weave them together so our readers understand how the novel and the research join to deepen your analysis. Okay. So when you synthesize stuff, you're combining multiple sources in your analysis and you're bringing it all together into a unified argument. So the second bullet point, you don't have to do it this way, but this is just sort of an example of what this might look or sound like in your proposal. So you might start off by presenting your idea, maybe something about food insecurity or something like that. Then you can introduce a quote or idea from the novel, give some relevant research of findings or data, and then explain how they connect to and support your argument. Or you might flip that around. So you present your idea, you give some research data, you throw in a quote from the novel that connects to it, and then you explain how they support your argument. So if you're talking about climate change having an impact on the Illinois Valley, you would first present that idea, and then you could talk about Butler's depiction of drought. You could then connect that to some research, maybe an article about local water shortages, and then talk about how together the real life research and the book highlight this urgent, need for adaptation. One last key point for synthesizing ideas that can be super simple but super helpful and have a really positive effect on your writing is to use transitional words and phrases. So words like similarly or in contrast or the supports. And there is a handout linked in the course resources on Brightspace. It's about right down in the middle there. It says transitions handout. So if you needed to use that, as like a helpful guide to using transitions, I would definitely encourage you to do so. So, moving forward with building our argument here, you've read about the rhetorical appeals and Rogerian arguments in your Empowered textbook. And I just wanted to take a minute to talk about the three modes of effective persuasion, which combines facts, credibility, and emotional connections. So, we've got ethos, which appeals to credibility by citing authoritative scholars and credible sources. That's the first rhetorical appeal. The second is logos. That's the appeal to logic through data, through statistics, and through clear reasoning. And then we have pathos, or I've also heard it pronounced pathos, which appeals to emotions by highlighting the human impact or community stories. So it's a great idea in your essay to use a mixture of all three of these types of persuasion. So I'm going to encourage you to most prominently use ethos and logos, so the appeals to credibility and the appeals to logic, but pathos can also be really useful as well. And as I mentioned down here, a good place for pathos is in the introduction. So maybe you start your introduction or, early in the proposal, you use a story to humanize your argument. That's going to appeal to the emotions, it's going to tug on the heartstrings, right? Like maybe you're writing about food insecurity, so you include a story about a college student who doesn't have enough food, right? Then, so now you got your reader's attention by sort of tugging on their emotions. Now you're ready to move into that hard data and those appeals to credibility to further back up what you have to say. So in this like sort of second or first, excuse me, first sub bullet point here on the bottom, we have an example of ethos when we say, according to Dr. Smith, we're appealing to an authority. And then logos often sounds something like data from XYZ source shows, right? So we're appealing to credibility and we're also appealing to logic. Now, do keep an eye out for logical fallacies. Your textbook talks about those. Those are things like hasty generalizations, where we make a broad claim without evidence. Post hoc ergo propter hoc, also called false cause, where we assume one event caused another without proof. So just really keep a sharp eye on those arguments for their logic, and your overall argument is going to be much stronger. Okay, moving right along. So each section of this proposal builds on the last. So as you're writing each proposal section, you want to stay focused and organized by following the structure that the assignment sheet gives you and that I'm presenting to you here. This should help you meet the assignment expectations and also, again, hopefully keep you from feeling overwhelmed. Instead of thinking about it as 1,000 words, take a look at the recommended word length counts for each section in the digital course pack, and I think that'll make it feel much more manageable. So again, you'll start with the introduction, And to help write it clearly, remember to state that theme from the parable of the sower and connect it to why it matters to our local community. What won't be necessary is retelling the novel's plot. You can assume everyone reading this piece from you is familiar with the book, so you don't need to tell us the plot. We already know it. You can just jump right into the theme and how it connects to our community. In the discussion, that's where you're going to analyze and sort of get more deeply into this. So, how does Butler develop this theme? And you're going to use some textual evidence to support that. Again, you'll connect the theme to the community using research, and you'll maybe even present some possible solutions. And maybe they're informed by the novel, and maybe they're informed by the research, or both. Next, you'll present that focused and arguable research question that I mentioned already. In the group project proposal section, you're going to describe like a realistic and doable project, something like a food drive or a presentation. It's going to take around 5 hours, and you're just going to think about the goals, the steps to implement it, and the expected impact. And do keep in mind, if you're one of my online students, that this doesn't have to be something that you do physically together. It certainly can be, and I encourage you to do that. But for example, I could imagine a group that decides to do a social media campaign to advertise for Eagles Peak Food Pantry here on campus at IVCC. So each of you spends 5 hours, writing posts or maybe making videos for TikTok, whatever it is. And then you're each going to post them online. You're going to coordinate with each other for how you're doing this and where you're posting it, but you're only meeting in the virtual space. So when it comes to that project, again, feel free to be creative about how and what you do. And the goal for that, again, is not to be overwhelming. You can knock it out in an afternoon, but it's just something that connects and makes your research, sort of come to life. And then, of course, the conclusion, you're going to sort of wrap up what you talked about. So reflect on what you learned. Maybe you talk about the project's potential effect on the community. Okay, just a couple more slides here. It's important. It's so, so important. You've heard me say it again, and I'm going to say it again here. Accurate MLA citations are so important because A, they help you prevent plagiarism, which is a extremely crucial component, not only of this class, but of college in general. If you want to pass your college classes, you've got to avoid plagiarism. And it also strengthens your academic credibility. So when you're showing that you've engaged deeply with your sources and that you know how to cite them, you yourself are becoming an authority on what it is that you're talking about. So as it says in the first bullet point here, you want to make sure you format the proposal and the bibliography according to MLA standards. I have just a quick reminder here about in-text citations. These would be for quotations, paraphrases, and summaries from sources. And in MLA style, we're typically going to include the author's last name and page number. So like, for example, right here, you see Butler 45. If we don't have an author, typically you're going to use the title of the source, as shown here. Maybe there's a book called Reading the Sower, and then we have our page number 45. Sometimes you can use an organization in place of the author, so you can keep your eye out for that as well. And again, super simple. If there's no page number given, just leave it out. So you might just cite the author, or if you don't have an author, you're going to cite the title of the source. But again, this can get more complicated as you get into more sources. If you don't know off the top of your head how to cite a source with 3 authors or 5 authors or 15 authors, you're going to need to look to your resources to figure that out. Please don't guess. Feel free to ask me. Look in your course reading materials, look in the Little Seagull Handbook. The answers are out there for you. Again, just reviewing the necessary sources here, those 4 sources, including the parable and 1 local source. Each source is going to have a 50+ word annotation that summarizes and evaluates its credibility. So again, this is just like a little paragraph attached to each works cited entry where you're talking a little bit more about the source. And I give you some pretty clear guidelines on that in the digital course pack, so make sure you take a look at it. And I also even gave you a sample annotated entry just so you can see it. Now there is an option in Noodle Tools where when you create your entries for your sources that you can add an annotation in the box at the bottom. And then when you export all those annotations, the annotations will be there in your annotated bibliography. So I strongly recommend using Noodle Tools for that section. It'll just make your life a whole lot easier. I am one of those teachers that will be looking at your sources to make sure they're legit and that they exist. As you probably know, using tools like ChatGPT or other AI, large language models often results in phony sources, and they can look very real. You might ask, give me a source about college food insecurity, and it might spit out something that looks really realistic, but usually it's not. So I've seen everything from a real author paired with a fake book. Sometimes it might give you a real journal title, but then when I go look in the journal, the issue and volume number does not exist or it's not correct. So please do include active hyperlinks or DOIs for all of your electronic sources, because I will be taking a look at them. And if I can't find them, then you're running the risk of a plagiarism issue. So make sure your sources are real, make sure they're legit, and please make sure I can get to them. And then again, as it says in the pack, you can use MLA style headings for the digital course pack if you prefer. And I give you an example of that. Or you can just use the standard essay format if you don't want to mess with it. Just make sure you follow the progression of the elements the way that it's given in the course pack. So finally, once you have everything put together, all these bits and pieces of research, you'll be ready to polish your writing. So you read in this unit a refresher on comma splices, sentence fragments, and run-ons. You'll definitely want to keep your eye out for those in your writing. Those are those major sentence errors that can really make your communication ineffective. So check for sentence fragments. Make sure every sentence has a subject and a verb and a complete thought. Look for comma splices where two sentences have been joined using just a comma, because that doesn't work. Look out for fused sentences, or what we might call run on sentences, where we have multiple clauses just running in together. And think about using commas, think about using conjunctions, think about separating them into two sentences. We want to make sure each sentence is a meaningful unit that makes grammatical sense. So, like I mentioned, you want to maintain that formal and academic tone. And it's a great idea to vary your sentence length and your structure to help keep the reader engaged. So, if you notice you have a bunch of short sentences in a row, maybe think about combining a couple. If you notice that all of your sentences are very long, like compound, complex sentences, maybe think about throwing in a few shorter ones, a few simple sentences just to keep that reader engaged. And I encourage you to proofread and edit really carefully for your grammar, for your spelling, and for logical flow. So I always recommend just use the spelling and grammar tools that you will find in Microsoft Word. Stay away from AI tools to rewrite your sentences. Like Grammarly has a tendency to totally take over. And then our plagiarism detector is going to pick up your work as AI generated, and neither of us wants that to happen. So I would much rather see you relying on your own mind and your own skills for writing, as opposed to these AI tools. And honestly, they're not great. Like, people really promote using these tools to edit your writing. Like, put your essay into ChatGPT and see what it says about your sentence structure, and then it gives the worst feedback. Like, I've done it myself. And not only that, but then you're feeding your intellectual property into that machine, and it has it forever. So I'm not a fan. So yeah, stick to your own mind. So finally, when it comes to planning and revising your proposal, break it down into those sections and draft each of them. Think about consulting with your group for feedback and brainstorming throughout the unit, so that generating ideas slash brainstorming discussion, bounce ideas off of each other, share your paragraphs, talk about your research, talk about your sources. Of course, you want to avoid plagiarizing from each other, but that's a great way to sort of have that sort of in-class discussion experience online. So don't forget about asking your group for feedback. Of course, you can ask me for feedback, or the Writing Center. They're awesome. They're super helpful, and they have online options for getting help. And take a look at the rubric that I've included in the course pack for you. Before you submit it, zip through that rubric and sort of confirm that you've met all the criteria it gives you. So as I mentioned, IBCC Writing Center, they're there for you. They're super helpful. You've got lots of course materials that you can refer to for argumentation and research methods. Definitely give yourself time to draft. The upcoming assignments are not ones you're going to want to try to write the night before. You'll just be like so stressed out and giving yourself a major headache. So give yourself plenty of time to write and revise and proofread. And if you have any questions, please do ask for clarification if needed. So thank you for listening to this presentation. I hope that it was helpful, and please let me know if any questions come up. Thanks.